day the college entrance exams ended, the prettiest girl in school pulled me into the woods, right in front of the entire class, just as I was at a complete loss for what to do. And then, to my surprise, she kissed me, and a sweet, uniquely girlish scent just exploded in my mouth. Then, her voice trembling with tears, she said, "Yevfan, I'm willing to give you my heart. Everything I have, everything I will ever have, I give to you. But only if you promise me one thing. My life is yours." I was taken aback by the scene, so it turned out her mother was gravely ill and urgently needed 600,000 for the surgery. Now, for a rich kid and a total slacker like me, 600,000 won was just about half a month's allowance for me. But I still turned her down without a second thought, because it seemed that the heart of the top student, the ice queen of the school, came at quite a price. But unfortunately, I'm not the kind of person who believes in things like love. My parents could enter a marriage of convenience for the sake of the family, and they've kept up the image of a model couple for over 20 years. But do they even have hearts? Feelings? I guess so. But their hearts belong to everyone else. So don't talk to me about feelings. I don't believe you. I straightened my back. I walked up to him. I stood a full head taller than him. I could clearly see his shoulders trembling, and the glistening teardrops of gold and silver hanging from it. I reached out my hand. He froze for a moment. She instinctively closed her eyes. I flicked her forehead lightly with my finger. Chuchuchi froze. She opened her eyes, looking at me in a daze. I pulled my hand back. I stared into Chuchuchi's eyes. He said, enunciating each word clearly, "Chuchuchi, listen to me and listen carefully. So, are you expecting me to be the kind of who preys on people's misfortune? Or do you want me to be a good person? Have a little mercy. Give you a hand." He was completely stunned. He just stared at me, completely dumbfounded. His mind had clearly gone completely blank, but I was patient, and I just kept my eyes on him. Finally, he snapped out of it. His tense shoulders slumped in an instant. Chuchuchi's voice was filled with a glimmer of humble hope. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, help me." I shook my head decisively. "No, I'm no philanthropist. It's not that I don't have the money. I'm not gonna spend it on something pointless. After all, 600,000 is enough for me to buy dozens of Napoleon cats." The plea in his eyes instantly turned to despair, seeing her on the verge of breaking down. And just like that, my own cruel amusement faded away. But then, I changed my tune. But the thing is, I don't want to be either the bad guy or the good guy, but we can be business people. I remember you were a top student, so you've got a lot of potential down the line. So I can lend you the money. Consider it a personal investment. 600,000. I can transfer it to you right now. His eyes instantly lit up with disbelieving joy. But I have one condition. In 10 years, you'll pay me back 1 million. The interest isn't even that high. That shouldn't be too hard for you. Plus, you have to get into Tsinghua or Peking University in the Gaokao a month from now. This is the first step in proving you have the potential to repay the loan. Proof. And it's also the risk control clause for this investment. It was as if he had grabbed onto his last lifeline. He immediately gave a heavy nod, as if afraid I'd change my mind. I left him my phone number. Then I turned and walked away. I couldn't be bothered to see the look on his face. I walked out of the small woods. The sunlight felt warm on my skin. It was warm and comforting. The truth is, I never really cared whether he paid me back or not. 600,000 won was really nothing to me. The terms of the contract? That's just for show, for outsiders. Otherwise, every Tom, and Harry would be coming to me for money. Even with all my money, I can't just burn it like this. Spending 600 grand for one. I get to feel good about myself for doing a good deed today. Getting a front row seat to the school bell's desperate situation. So it's not a total loss. After my talk with the lawyer, we set a time and a place. And while I was at it, I forwarded the contract to Chuchuchi. And with that, the matter was settled. I started walking towards the cemetery plot that was meant for me. A classroom for club activities. Through the window, I could see what was happening inside. My childhood friend, Jiang Li, was with some young punk, deep in conversation. The Jiang family and my family go way back, and our businesses were closely intertwined. So Jiang Li and I were basically childhood sweethearts. But that was all fine. The main one was Jiang Li's older sister, Jiang Shui, a true golden girl, in every sense of the word. She was gorgeous, and tough as nails. And the best part? She was always so good to me. And the allowance she gave me each time? We're talking millions. For a good-for-nothing like me, I was basically a walking ATM. Besides, Jiang Shui is about to get engaged to my good-for-nothing big brother, Ye Yun. After the engagement, she'll officially be my sister-in-law. A match made in heaven, and my cushy life as a rich bum would be even more secure. But lately, Jiang Li's been all over some punk. His grades plummeted from the top of the class all the way to the middle. So when senior Jiang Li came to me specifically to ask about the situation, I knew it. I had to step in and handle this. After all, I did take her money. I had to do something for them in return. Not open yet, and ran right into a guy who was rushing out. He staggered back a couple of steps. His eyes were filled with humiliation and defiance. I recognize him. I think he's one of the students Jiang Li used to sponsor. He got really good grades, and a decent guy too. Look at the state of him. I guess you could say I fell in love with my benefactor. So the benefactor falls for the good for nothing. What a classic sob story, huh? I shook my head. I couldn't help but chuckle a little. He's still just a kid, too naive. For rich kids like us, we just throw money at problems to get things done. Most of the time, it's just a habit, a pastime to flaunt our status. But that doesn't mean we're the good guys. If you're truly grateful, then work your way to the top. Repay it with benefits. Now that's how the world works. But mixing feelings into it, that's just asking for trouble. I ignored him. I went straight ahead and pushed open the ajar door. Jiang Li was chatting with Sun Yang, laughing so hard she was practically in stitches. Seeing it was me, Jiang Li's smile froze on her face. Her brow immediately furrowed. Her voice was full of wariness and impatience. Yefan, what are you doing here? You're here to convince me to break up with Ah Yang too, aren't you? Let me tell you something. Don't waste your breath. Just some useless young master of the Yi family. You can't even get your own life straight. What right do you have to tell me what to do? I'm not angry. I even find it a little funny. I don't care about you. I was just curious. The always well-behaved goody two-shoes of the Jiang family. How could you suddenly fall for a guy like Jiang Li? Raising her voice with a sneer. What do you know? Yang is different from you hypocritical rich kids. We live for real, and he's free. He threw an arm around Sun Yang's shoulder. This is what it means to be alive. A life that's just following the same old script. Now that's what I call boring. Now that's what I call a waste of a life. And then she turned her attention to me. And you, Ye Fan, are a particularly pathetic case. You can't even study properly, and you can't even have any fun. Other than being a member of the Yi family, what else are you? You're a complete and utter good-for-nothing. I nodded, with a look of sudden realization. Ah, so that's the wind of youth, huh? Jiang Li probably thought I was convinced by his words. A smug look crept across his face. Sun Yang also puffed out his chest. The look on my face was no longer one of sheer terror. The next moment, I was looking down on Jiang Li from above. Are you sober now? He instinctively took a step back under my gaze. Sun Yang was still groaning on the ground. He looked at me. His eyes were filled with fear. I walked up to Sun Yang. I thought you liked it real, didn't you? Do you like freedom? Now tell me, how does it feel? Is this freedom? Sun Yang was in so much pain that he was drenched in sweat. I couldn't get a single word out. Jiang Li tried to come over and pull me away, but one look from me was enough to send her back. Weren't you so tough just a moment ago? What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Shivering and didn't dare to make a peep. Suddenly, I felt the whole thing was just pointless. With a backbone like that, you dare to chase after a rich girl? I yanked Jiang Ling, who was still trembling, to his feet. We headed straight for that notorious spot in the west of the city, a known hangout for all sorts of riffraff. I dragged Jiang Li out of the car and pinned her against a grimy back alley wall. Against the wall, the pungent stench of piss and rotting garbage hit me. Jiang Li threw up on the spot. I pointed to a few punks with dyed hair at the mouth of the alley, who were busy yelling at each other in an icy tone. See? This is the wind of youth you're so fond of. Real enough for you? Is this freedom enough for you? If you really like me, I'll throw you over there right now. Jiang Li's face instantly went pale with fear, clutching my arm for dear life. Sobbing uncontrollably, I was wrong. Yefan, let's go home. Let's go home. Please, I'm begging you. Just then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. It was Sun Yang. Limping, he tried to sneak away while I wasn't looking. He actually snuck away from the other end of the alley, and I couldn't be bothered to chase him. Trash like him. Not worth it. I'll do it again. Jiang Li clearly saw the color drain from his face as well, and with that fleeing figure, her last sliver of hope vanished as well, was completely shattered. She had stopped crying. She just stood there, completely still, as if her very soul had been ripped out. I shoved her back into the car. He didn't say another word the entire way. The car pulled up to Jiang's house. He opened the door himself. He walked in, completely lost and dejected. I didn't get out of the car. I just told the driver to turn the car around and take me home. Later that night, I got a text message on my phone. It was from Jiang Shui. Yefan thanked her. I replied with a "You're welcome" meme, and with that, the matter was settled. And just as I thought. For the next 2 days, things were quiet on the Jiang family front. No one came looking for trouble. I knew it had to be my future sister-in-law, Jiang Shui, who had the whole thing swept under the rug. Looks like this was the right move. My cushy life as a rich slacker was finally set. But the next day, the smile was wiped right off my face. Sun Yang is dead. He died in a car accident. It seems my soon-to-be sister-in-law is far more ruthless than I ever imagined. All of a sudden, this family feels a little terrifying. Everyone wears a meticulously crafted mask, ruthlessly clearing away all obstacles. My big shot elite brother was the same way, and so was my future sister-in-law, Jiang Shui. And I was the only one who was different. A guy who just wanted to coast through life. I shuddered violently. I sat up in bed. I have to move out right now. I gotta get away from these ruthless people, and fast. Gotta stay alive to keep fighting. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. The next morning, bright and early, I went downstairs, carrying a suitcase I'd packed long ago. My mom was sitting in the living room, elegantly sipping her morning tea. When she saw me, she merely lifted her eyelids, a faint, indifferent gesture. Her tone was flat. "Where are you going? Somewhere else to sleep?" He wasn't asking. He lowered his head and went back to his financial magazine. And as for my so-called father, who knows where he is? This house is cold, like an icebox. Pulling my suitcase, I walked out of that gorgeous villa without ever looking back. I had a penthouse apartment downtown that I'd bought a long time ago, and now it's finally come in handy. The apartment was huge and empty, and the fridge was completely empty. So I drove to the biggest supermarket nearby. I need to fill this new home with food and junk food. Riding the shopping cart, I weaved through aisles lined with dazzling arrays of products. I'm like a shopping robot on a rampage, and just blankly tossed things into the cart. Just as I was rounding a corner, I suddenly stopped in my tracks, because there, in a corner of the temporary shelter, I saw a girl. She was furtively stuffing a bag of bread into her sleeve. She looked a few years younger than me. Petite. She was wearing a school uniform that had been washed until it was faded. She had a clean-cut look, though. Too bad she had sticky fingers. I didn't say a word, just leaning there against the shelf, arms crossed, watching her with great interest. She was struggling to stuff it in. The sleeve is too small. The bread was too big. She tried over and over again. He was so flustered that a thin sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. Suddenly, as if he'd sensed something, his movements froze. He slowly raised his head. Our eyes met in the air. I stared at him, silent. 10 seconds. His face flushed from white to red in the blink of an eye. First, terror filled those big eyes. Then panic, until they were finally filled with a thick, all-consuming sense of shame and humiliation. The hand holding the bread was shaking uncontrollably. Then came a soft thud. The bread fell to the ground. It was as if all the strength had been drained from his body. His whole body just deflated. He lowered his head. He wished he could just bury his face in the ground. This is so pointless. I walked over, bent down, and picked up the bag of bread and tossed it into my shopping cart. Then, without a second thought, I started grabbing all sorts of cookies from the nearby shelf and candies into the cart all at once. Before long, my cart was piled high like a small mountain. I pushed the cart over to her, but she kept her head down. Her whole body was tensed up, like she was awaiting judgment. I nudged her faded canvas shoes with the tip of my foot. Her voice was flat. I had no money for food. He flinched. Then, he gave a very slight nod. A second passed. Then, as if he'd remembered something. Then she shook her head vigorously. I was getting a little impatient. What's with all the nodding and shaking your head? What is this, a mime show? What's going on? I guess my tone was a bit harsh. She flinched, startled. He suddenly looked up at me, his eyes rimmed red. Her eyes were brimming with tears. Her mouth opened slightly. A few indistinct sounds escaped her throat. Her hands were flailing awkwardly, trying to gesture at something. I froze. In that instant, then a thought flashed through my mind. The mute girl. I looked at her, so anxious and helpless. And just like that, the impatience I was feeling vanished. I was filled with regret. In that moment, I felt like a complete and utter bastard. The kind of regret that makes you want to slap yourself in the middle of the night. I didn't say anything else. I turned around and went to get another shopping cart and filled the other cart to the brim with easy-to-store food. Then, pushing the two carts, I motioned for him to follow. He seemed a bit dazed, like he hadn't quite processed what was happening. I couldn't be bothered to explain. I just grabbed his wrist and pulled him towards the checkout counter. After we paid, I was carrying all the bags by myself. He squatted down behind me like a little shadow. He was also holding a few bags of the latest spirit stones. I stuffed everything into the back seat of my sports car. Then I motioned for him to get in. He hesitated for a moment, but eventually pulled open the passenger door and got in. She then asked him for his home address. She took the phone. Her tiny fingers tapped away at the screen for a good while. Finally, a location was pinpointed. It was in an old district, a dump I wouldn't be caught dead in. I didn't say a word. He just started the car. The entire ride. The car was eerily quiet. He kept his head down the entire time. His hands were clutching the hem of his clothes tightly. The car wound its way through narrow, rundown alleyways. Finally, it stopped in front of a dilapidated apartment building that looked like it could collapse at any moment. I turned off the engine. Together, we unloaded the food from the car. The hallway was dark and damp. It was filled with the stench of mold and a host of other unidentifiable smells. He led me up to the third floor. He opened a chipped wooden door. A strong medicinal smell of traditional Chinese herbs hit me. The room was tiny. So small, in fact, that you could take in the entire bare-bones room at a single glance. Now I've finally seen it for myself. On a rickety wooden bed lay an emaciated old man. The old woman's eyes were shut tight. Her breathing was faint. The girl put down what she was holding and rushed to the bedside. With practiced ease, she tucked the blanket snugly around the elderly woman. Her eyes filled with concern. I think I get it now. It's not that she couldn't afford a meal. She didn't have money to treat her family's illness. Stealing bread? She must have been starving. But she didn't want to touch the money meant for her grandmother's medical treatment. Ugh, not this sob story again. I really don't get this girl. After getting me settled in, her grandmother walked up to me and gave me a deep bow. Then, she picked up a worn-out notebook from the table, scribbling something down on it quickly. On it was a line of neat handwriting. "Thank you. How much are all these things? I'll pay you back someday. I promise." I looked at that line and couldn't help but laugh. With what? Or will you steal it again? I didn't say a word. Instead, he just pulled out his phone and dialed his family's personal assistant. I kept my instructions to the phone, brief and to the point. Lao Wang, get me a private room at the downtown hospital. Get an ambulance to the tube-shaped apartment building in the west of the city within 15 minutes. I'll send you the fee. Just pay it directly from my account. The whole thing took less than a minute. The girl was completely dumbfounded. He just stared at me, mouth agape. She'd forgotten how to cry and how to write. I can understand. For him, something that would take a lifetime of longing to even dream of is something I can fix with just a single phone call. I nudged the duffel bag at his feet with my foot. What are you spacing out for? Pack your things. Time to get to the hospital. He snapped out of his daze. He immediately started packing in a flurry of panic. To be honest, there wasn't much to pack. A few old, faded pieces of clothing. A chipped enamel mug. The ambulance arrived quickly. The paramedics carefully lifted the elderly man onto the stretcher. From beginning to end, the girl was clutching tightly onto the corner of my clothes, as if she was afraid I'd suddenly vanish. I was a little uncomfortable, but I didn't shake her off. Once we got to the hospital, Everything was arranged perfectly, and arranged for 24-hour nursing care in the special ward. A top-tier team of specialists immediately convened for a consultation. I stood outside the bright, spotless hospital room, watching the doctors bustling about inside, and there was the girl by the bedside, a mix of fear and gratitude in her eyes. The gloom in my heart, born from Sun Yang's death, seemed to have lifted a little. Spending money really does buy you a good mood. Just then, I felt a gentle tug on my pant leg. He held up that tattered notebook and handed it to me. It read, "How can I ever repay your kindness?" As I leaned against the doorframe, watching the girl, I never said I wanted anything in return. She was getting anxious, scribbling something down in her notebook. The words were a bit of a scrawl, but the meaning was clear. "I can't just take your money for nothing. He's a good man." I saw the words, "a good person." The smile on his lips deepened. I can't believe someone like me is considered a good person these days. It's good to be rich. I cut him off mid-sentence. First of all, I'm not a good person. And second, I already told you. The one thing I can't stand is trouble. And you're here, arguing with me about it. And that's just you causing trouble for me. Got it? He was a bit dazed by my twisted logic, just staring at me blankly, unsure of how to respond. Seeing him like that, he sighed. I walked up to him. Without another word, I took the notebook and pen from her hand. He started scribbling away in the notebook. When I finished writing, I shoved the notebook back into her hand. "Just think of it as me buying some insurance for the future. You just focus on your studies and get into a good university. What if one day I fall on hard times? When I'm begging on the streets, just remember to give me a bowl of rice." He stared at the words in the notebook. He was frozen for a long, long time. Then he looked up. Those eyes, so clear and pure, like a mountain spring. Tears finally welled up in her eyes, but she didn't make a sound. Instead, silent tears just kept falling, one by one. They fell onto the tattered pages of her old notebook. I awkwardly averted my gaze. "All right, don't cry. Besides, your grandmother still needs you to take care of her. Stop crying. What's so bad about it? What school do you go to? I'll have Lao Wang pay your tuition for you while he's at it. And every month I'll have 5,000 transferred to you for living expenses until you graduate from college and get a job. Don't give me that. And don't even think about counting this as insurance." With that said, I couldn't be bothered to watch this sentimental scene any longer. I exchanged a few quick words with the doctor. Then I turned and walked away, driving down the wide open road. And suddenly, it all felt a bit ridiculous. Me, the second young master of the Yi family, ending up on the streets? As if, no way, that's just impossible. It's just a way of spending money to earn some good karma for myself. After all, the people I hang out with are all just as ruthless as each other. I need to rack up some good karma, just to make sure like me, could live a life of luxury forever. And just like that, I hit rock bottom for 5 years. And just like that, 5 years were gone. And my big brother, Ye Yun, that high and mighty elite, well, after he got married, when the whole thing blew up, I was sunbathing on my private island. When I got the call, I even found it a little funny, just as I expected. Deep down, my brother is just a weak-willed pushover, and yet, he just loves to put on this whole devoted, affectionate act. I can't even be bothered to go back and watch this whole farce. Besides, all these rich family marriages are pretty much the same anyway. It was these two things, until my bank cards started getting frozen one after another. All the properties under my name, all my stocks and funds were wiped out overnight. It was only then that it slowly dawned on me that something was wrong. By the time I rushed back from the island, everything had already been settled. The Yi Group was no more. Its name had been changed to Jiang. My father was indicted on multiple financial charges. The evidence was irrefutable. He's pretty much going to spend the rest of his life crying behind bars. My older brother, Ye Yun, was left with nothing. And me? I was just a good-for-nothing, happy to just coast through life. But even I wasn't spared. All the private savings I'd worked my off to stash away for over 20 years, all gone. I was standing at the door of my penthouse apartment. I stared at the two expressionless bodyguards in black suits blocking my way. My head was just buzzing. Hold on, girl. I mean, if you want revenge, fine. And get rid of my brain-dead brother. I wouldn't have minded. But you sent my dad to prison and cleaned out the entire night market. What is even happening right now? Just thinking about it makes my blood boil. Don't tell me I'm living in some kind of female-led revenge story. I must be one of those cannon fodder relatives who just gets swept away in the process, right? Just then, the door opened. And there was Jiang Shi, sitting right on my favorite Italian sofa. She sauntered over, gracefully swirling the wine in her glass. She was more beautiful than ever, but also colder. That powerful aura of someone who has everything under control was suffocating. He saw me put down my glass and gave me a gentle smile. Yefan is back. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him. He stood up. He walked towards me step by step. He reached out to touch my face. Don't look at me like that. I didn't want to either, so I turned my head away, but he wasn't annoyed. He withdrew his hand. He spoke slowly and deliberately. Your brother was a fool. I gave him a chance, but unfortunately he didn't know how to cherish it. Jiang Shui shook her head and looked at my expression with a hint of amusement. So, is that your excuse for ruining my entire family? He paused. His voice was laced with a hint of temptation. But things are different now. He's the one who wronged me first. My revenge is perfectly justified. Right now, I don't need a husband. As she spoke, she took a step closer to me with a strong, aggressive tone. So, Fan, how about you stay here and keep me company? And take care of you, just like old times? I almost laughed my eyes out listening to that. I wiped the corner of my eye. I looked at Jiang Shui's flawless face. From the sound of it, I'm almost starting to wonder if you were the one who delivered it yourself." The smile on her face finally faltered for a moment. It was only for a split second, but I still caught it. The last shred of hope I was clinging to vanished into thin air. Sure enough, this woman has been a complete psycho from the very beginning. She'll stop at nothing to get what she wants. The smile vanished from my face. I stared at her, my face blank. Then, I slowly raised my hand, giving him my middle finger. The last trace of a smile vanished from his face. Replacing it was a cold, blank indifference. Ungrateful. He waved his hand. Without another glance in my direction, 2 bodyguards immediately stepped forward. One on my left, one on my right. They lifted me up like a sack of potatoes. And just like that, I was violently thrown out of my own home. I stood there in the empty hallway. I couldn't help but scoff. If I actually fell for his bullshit, then stay. Once he gets tired of me, I'd probably be dead before I even knew what hit me. I know I'm no match for him. Even my dad, that old fox, got played by him. I'm just a guy who knows how to party. How could I possibly take him on? Stay away from this crazy woman. Being alive is all that matters. I pulled out my phone and opened the contacts. I found the number of the first person on my list, the one who's always calling me Brother You, and made the call, and hit dial. "Hello, young Master Joe. This is Yefan." There was 3 seconds of silence on the other end of the line. He spoke cautiously. "I'm sorry, you have the wrong number." The line went dead. I froze for a second. Then I let out a self-deprecating laugh. Moving on to the second number. Same result. The third one. The 4th person either got the wrong number, or they just wouldn't pick up at all. I leaned against the cold, hard wall. I started deleting all those so-called friends from my phone, one by one, until finally, only a few lonely family numbers were left on the screen. I sold off everything I owned of value. All of it added up to less than 100,000 win. Back in the day, this wouldn't even cover my bar tab for one night. But now it's everything I have. As I was wandering aimlessly through the streets, before I knew it, I'd walked back to my apartment building. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. No, that won't work. Maybe I'll just find a factory and tighten some screws. The barrier to entry is low. Plus, room and board are included. Anyway, I've had over 20 years of a rich life. I've had my fill of it. I kept my head down. I walked, lost in thought. Before I knew it, I'd stumbled right into a soft embrace. A faint, sweet fragrance drifted towards me. Instinctively, I wanted to apologize. I looked up, only to be met with a pair of crystal clear eyes. It was a girl with delicate features. She looks a little familiar, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember where. But it was clear she knew who I was, and I could clearly see in his eyes the very moment he recognized me. And suddenly, it just burst with this indescribable mix of surprise and relief. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she wanted to say something. But then, it was as if she realized something. But in the end, she just fumbled nervously in her pocket and pulled out a phone, typing something out quickly. The phone screen read, "Mr. Yeah, do you remember me?" I stared at the words, "Mr. Yeah." Not many people call me that these days. I studied his face closely. The fragments of my memory began to slowly piece themselves together. Then, it suddenly hit me. I was a little surprised. The figure trembling in the supermarket 5 years ago. The girl who was taking care of her grandmother in that run-down little house. It's you. His eyes lit up in an instant, brighter than I'd ever seen. He nodded vigorously. The sheer joy in his clear eyes was almost overflowing. I was even more confused now. "What are you doing here?" He started typing furiously again. He held the phone out to me. The screen read, "I saw the news. About the Jiang family. I was so worried about you. I had a feeling you might come back here to see. So I've been waiting here. Since yesterday. It felt like my heart was being hammered. So that means, for the entire 24 hours since I was kicked out, had been waiting downstairs. Right by this apartment building I could never enter again. Waiting for a sliver of a chance in the most awkward way possible. A wave of absurd and complex emotions washed over me. While all my so-called friends were busy cutting ties with me, a young girl I had almost forgotten. And yet, here she was, waiting for me for a full day and night. I forced a smile. I wanted to say something. She seemed to notice my predicament. Something was displayed on the phone screen. "Do you have nowhere else to go?" I was silent. I guess that was my silent agreement. He put his phone away. And then, she did something I never saw coming. He reached out and gently tugged on the sleeve of my hoodie. She was so frail I could have easily pulled away. But that faint, pleading tug on my sleeve. But it was like an invisible chain, rendering me completely still. He pulled me along, turning towards the street corner, and for some reason, I didn't resist. And just like that, I followed behind him. We walked up to a small, in front of a bakery, glowing with a warm light. The shop was called Glimmer Bakery. The shop was already closed, but the lights in the display window were still on. She unlocked the door with her key. Then she turned and motioned for me to come inside. The shop wasn't big, but it was clean and tidy. The air was filled with the sweet scent of cream and wheat. From under the counter, and pulled out a folder that had been carefully laminated. He pulled out a yellowed piece of paper from inside and slid it over to me. It was the insurance policy I had hastily scribbled out 5 years ago. If I ever end up down on my luck, when I was begging on the streets, just remember to save a bowl for me. She pointed to the words above. Then, she pointed at me, then at herself, and finally at the shop. The look in her eyes was so serious, as if she were fulfilling a sacred contract. Finally, she turned and opened the oven and brought out a still warm croissant, handing it to me. No pity, no sympathy. There was only a sense that it was simply my turn. I took the bread and took a bite. The taste, it couldn't compare to the fancy meals I was used to, but it gave me a sense of peace. "Are you guys still hiring?" The girl was taken aback for a moment, and then A brilliant smile lit up her face. She nodded vigorously. On that day, and just like that, the first half of my aimless life came to an end, and the rest of my life became intertwined with this little shop called Glimmer, became inextricably linked. And my boss was I once thought I would never see that anxious, mute little girl again. This young girl. Her name is Shen Yuwei. With the money I provided and her own savings, after graduating from college, she opened this bakery right here on this street. The shop itself was small, but business was surprisingly good. The neighbors all seemed to look out for her in a special way. He would always make a point to stop by and buy a few bread rolls and exchange a few words. It's not easy for a young girl on her own. Perfect. Now I've got some help. He just looks so dependable. I was wearing an apron with a little bear print on it, clumsily packing the freshly baked toast. Hearing these words, I felt nothing. Don't worry, me, a guy who can't even lift a finger, a good-for-nothing who can't even tell wheat from chaff. How could they tell? That I'm someone they can count on. But I have to admit, my being here did lighten her load quite a bit. At least half of the flour is this low-sugar substitute for a job like this. She didn't have to do it all by herself. Just a small, slender girl. She was gritting her teeth and toughing it out. At night, after the shop closed, and we'd go back upstairs to our little home. Bare walls. That's what you'd call the place he used to live in. So I guess you could say this place has one bare wall, a dining table, 2 chairs, a sofa, and a small room, partitioned from the balcony. And that's my bedroom. It's even smaller than the bathroom in my old villa, but I slept more soundly than I had in over 20 years. More soundly than I had in over 20 years. No scheming, no pretense. The only thing in the air was the faint, sweet scent of wheat wafting up from downstairs. I started learning how to be a normal person, learning how to sweep without filling the whole room with dust, learning how to cook porridge in a pressure cooker without blowing up the kitchen. Most of the time, the results were disastrous. I mistook salt for sugar and ended up with a pot of salt-caked red bean paste. He took a bite, his face scrunched up, but he didn't spit it out. Instead, she just silently chugged a large glass of water. Then she picked up a pen and started writing in a notebook. This is quite a unique flavor. Maybe a little less sugar next time. I looked at his serious expression. I was so annoyed, but I couldn't help but laugh. I snatched the bowl and dumped it in the trash. From that day on, I started learning sign language. I bought a whole stack of textbooks. Every night after he fell asleep, right there in my little cubicle, I'd practice over and over again, staring at my phone screen, starting with the simplest one, hello, to saying thank you, and finally, today, good work, good night. The first time I managed to say it to her with my clumsy hand gestures, good morning, she froze. And then, in her eyes, which were always so calm, as if a star had been dropped into them in an instant, dazzlingly so, he raised his hand as well, and answered me with such earnestness. In that moment, I felt that in all my 20-plus years, there hadn't been a single moment as worth it as I did at that very moment. And so, the days went by, and things gradually started to get better. I went from being a complete idiot who couldn't even use an oven, into a baking apprentice who could expertly whip cream and pipe beautiful frosting. The shop's business was getting better and better. We even took over the shop next door, and expanded the shop. I had a decent sum of money in my bank account again, but it was enough savings for me to move out and rent a place. I've tried to bring it up with Shen Yuwei a few times, but the words were on the tip of my tongue, and I just swallowed them back down. But where would I live? What would I eat? Besides, what's the point of being all by myself? Besides, it's not easy for a young girl like her to be on her own, and I can help out too. It's not like I didn't come up with a few excuses for myself, and with that, I could Xin and Li Dede continue to freeload here, and Shen Yuwei never brought it up either. It was as if she had silently accepted my presence. I don't believe in love, and my old man, and my brother, he's the perfect example of what not to do. But this sense of peace I have with Shen Yuwei, it's addictive. I shook my head. I pushed all those messy thoughts out of my head. It's almost noon. Time to get her lunch ready. I was just taking off my apron, about to head upstairs, but just then, a familiar figure pushed open the shop door and walked in. The person was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. Her makeup was flawless. Her hair was elegantly styled in a neat updo. She exuded the sophisticated aura of a successful professional from head to toe. It was Chuchuchi. I hadn't seen her in 5 years. That air of humility and Jiangpo, born from poverty, had vanished from her, had been completely washed away. She was no longer the girl, the ice queen of the school who begged me for help in her faded uniform. Now she was polished and flawless, and following behind her was a young man. He looked like he was in his early 20s. Dressed in a sharp suit, he looked like a college boy who had just graduated. The look in his eyes was filled with undisguised hostility. His gaze lingered on me, probably the male assistant, Chuchuchi. His gaze lingered for a moment on the little bare apron. His brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, but he quickly replaced it with that proper smile of his. Yeah, Fan. It's been a while. I nodded. That was my greeting. I kept untying my apron without stopping. He seemed like he wanted to ask something, but then thought better of it. Finally, she took a check from her bag and slid it across the table to me. I glanced at the number on the check. I picked it up, pocketed it, and said, thanks, I earned it. To be honest, I never really expected to get the money back anyway. The male assistant behind him saw how readily I took the money. The contempt in his eyes grew even more pronounced. Chuchuchi quickly composed herself. His gaze swept across our small bakery, finally, landing on my face. That look, it was one I knew all too well, and a kind of condescending pity. Fan, I heard about what happened with your family. If you don't have anywhere else to go right now, you can come to my company. My husband's and my company is still in its early stages. When it's time to hire people for real, Seeing that deliberately compassionate look on his face, it made my stomach churn. That deal back then was my investment. And now he's here to repay the debt. We're even now. And now, he's putting on this whole act again. He wants to turn his creditor from back then into an object of his charity. I glanced at the male assistant beside him, whose glare was growing more and more hostile. And just like that, it all made sense. He's just getting a kick out of playing the hero, just like how I used to enjoy watching her in her moment of need. And now, he's enjoying my downfall. Only, she's a lot more hypocritical than I ever was, and she had to cloak herself in this veneer of warmth. I refused coldly. That won't be necessary. I'm doing just fine here. The smile on Chuchuchi's face faltered for a moment. Xiao Fan, don't be like that. The life I'm living, I cut him off. His voice was tinged with impatience. I said, it's not necessary. He finally stopped insisting. A strange, almost ancient look flickered across her beautiful face. All right then. Well, if you've made up your mind, in that case, I won't force you. Just as he turned to leave, his male assistant, who was standing behind him, immediately stepped forward and thoughtfully offered his hand, lightly brushing his arm for support. Chuchuchi also naturally turned her head to the side. She gave him a smile, one that only the two of them could understand. And just then, I nonchalantly picked up my phone and discreetly snapped a picture of them. Perfect angle. In the photo, the male assistant's hand was almost on her waist, and the smile on her face. No one would ever think otherwise. That was just the look she'd give any ordinary subordinate. I raised my phone and waved them off. Then it took me about 2.5 minutes. I looked up her husband's public email address online. Then I anonymously sent that photo over. With that all done, I deleted the photo and the sent email. I felt a lot better, but Shen Yue just finished her lunch quietly. My mind gradually settled down as well. Leaning against the counter, I started to think about what to do with this 1 million. The numbers on it were so clear they were almost dazzling. How long has it been since I've seen this much money? At least our lives won't have to be so tight anymore. And we could finally get the new equipment Shen Yue had been dreaming of. The more I think about it, the happier I get. I've never felt 1 million wen could be so useful. Just then, the wind chime by the door gave a little jingle. A crisp, yet deliberately soft voice interrupted my reverie. Xiao Fan. I turned around and saw Jiang Shui. Wow. Seems like a lot of familiar faces are dropping by today. If I remember correctly, her poor husband, Yang Yonghao, has been dead for less than 2 years, right? Can I help you with something? I leaned against the counter, my face a blank slate. He bit his lip. Her eyes were dull and lifeless. That look of hers, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't bring herself to. It almost made me sick to my stomach. There was a hint of grievance in Zhang Li's voice. I want to see you, Miss Quianair. All right, what's this little act all about now? I almost laughed out loud. Her eyes immediately welled up with tears, as if she'd been dealt the greatest injustice. Ye Fan, I know I was a fool back then. I've done so many things wrong. I always thought I was the kind of person who wanted a whirlwind romance, but it's only now that I understand. All I've ever really wanted is a stable home. His tone was sincere. Her eyes were filled with deep affection. She looked up. Her big, watery eyes were fixed right on me. They were filled with deep affection and memories. Ye Fan, let's start over. I know what you're going through right now. I admit what my sister did was going too far, but that's okay. I can take care of you. There was a hint of pity and condescension in his voice. Oh, so we're back to the prodigal son's return is more precious than gold routine, are we? But don't get the wrong idea. Since when did we even start? When did we ever start anything in the first place? I barely resisted the urge to roll my eyes. My mind drifted back to a few years ago. Her wedding to Yang Yonghao, the impoverished student from back then. It was grand and incredibly touching. At the wedding, she said through her tears, she was the light of his life, and the happiness she was willing to do anything to hold on to. And I was standing right there, in the audience, looking at that poor fool who was completely moved to tears. There was only one thought on my mind. This guy's so screwed. And just as I thought, less than 2 years into the marriage, Jiang Li got tired of him. When the passion faded, marriage settled back into the daily grind. Naturally, he grew tired of her. And then, just as planned, a manipulative pretty boy showed up. Luckily, that poor boy wasn't a complete pushover. He was holding on to evidence against Jiang Li. He wanted to prove himself. And then, he was gone. What are the odds of that? I bet this is the handiwork of my dear ex-sister-in-law Jiang Shui again. I snapped out of my thoughts. I looked at Jiang Li, who was still putting on her little show of affection right in front of me. The corner of my mouth curled up into a wider and wider smirk. Jiang Li, do you think all men are idiots? The expression on her face froze. I began to speak, my voice slow and deliberate. Your husband's funeral was quite the grand affair. I saw it on the news. You were crying your heart out. It was truly heartbreaking to see and bring the viewers to tears. But what a shame. If I hadn't been at the hotel entrance that night, I saw someone who looked a lot like you, walking into an elevator with a handsome guy on her arm. Jiang Li's face instantly drained of all color. Oh, right. But that handsome guy didn't seem too pleased, and they danced for a long time. Jiang Li, you're tired. I take a step forward. I stared straight into her trembling eyes. Putting on an act? Wearing a mask every single day. Don't you find it disgusting? I backed him into a corner, forcing him to retreat, until he was backed up against a doorframe. shaking all over like a leaf in the autumn wind. You're lying. But his fierce rebuttal was as weak as a leaky bellows. I couldn't be bothered to waste any more words on him. I'm not worried about him retaliating. A woman so obsessed with playing the saint would never allow herself to lose her composure. He's just lashing out in shame to get back at him. His reputation meant more to him than his own life. He's worn that mask for far too long. It's already stuck to his face. It can't be peeled off anymore. Just go. It was as if he had been granted a pardon. He stumbled out the door. His retreating figure was a sorry sight. The shop was finally quiet again. I let out a long sigh of relief. It feels like I've finally exhaled all the bad luck I've been holding in for the past 5 years. I heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Shen Yue came downstairs, carrying a bowl of freshly stewed dessert. He walked up to me and hands me the bowl, her eyes asking me what was wrong. I shook my head. I'm fine. Shen Yue gestured in sign language. Her expression was full of concern. But you don't look happy. I looked into her clear eyes and smiled. Without putting down my bowl, she signed with somewhat clumsy hands. I'm fine. He understood. A sweet smile blossomed on her face. Sunlight streamed in through the shop window, falling upon us. It was so warm and cozy. After that day, I never paid attention to what was happening in that circle again. But they also completely lost touch with each other. Right now, all I want is to live a simple life with Shen Yue, just running this little shop and taking it day by day. Every morning at 5, I get up half an hour before he does. I'll head downstairs first to get the first batch of bread rising. By the time he comes downstairs, still half asleep, the kitchen is already filled with the aroma of wheat. The water's boiled too. He'd always start by signing good morning to me. Then, with practiced ease, he ties on his apron. Time to start preparing the day's desserts. We didn't talk much, but our teamwork became more and more seamless. Sometimes, when things get busy, he'd get all flustered and start sweating. I'd hand her a glass of ice water, and when she'd take the glass from me and her fingers would sometimes brush against the back of my hand, nice and cool, and so soft. I started to notice all of her little habits. He no longer had to cautiously guess what I was thinking. Our days were full. During the day, we ran the shop together, and at night, she would teach me how to make more complicated desserts. Sometimes, we could spend the entire night talking without using a single word and still have a complete conversation. This unspoken connection gave me a sense of peace. I started to seriously consider one thing. I want to marry him. I didn't believe in love, but I'm starting to believe that some people are just meant to be together. I just wanted things to stay this way, with him, forever. 3 months later, I confessed my love to her. Or rather, I proposed. It was her birthday, so behind her back, I was preparing a little surprise at the shop. So when she came downstairs that evening, the entire shop was aglow with candlelight. She stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her hand covering her mouth. I walked up to her and got down on one knee and pulled out a diamond ring. I don't know how to say this. All those sweet nothings, I can't believe it either. Vows of eternal love. Will you? She cried. Tears fell like a broken string of pearls, falling to the ground, one by one. He nodded vigorously. Then she held out her hand, asking me to put the ring on her finger. The ring was a bit too big. His hand was so thin, but she kept her fist clenched tightly, so it wouldn't fall off. I held her in my arms, breathing in the faint scent of her hair. In that moment, it suddenly dawned on me that the first 20+ years of my life was all just preparation for meeting her. Our wedding was very simple. It wasn't a big affair. We only invited our neighbors from the street, and a few classmates and friends we're still in touch with. I just wanted to give Shen Yue a proper wedding. The day before the wedding, I went to the barber to get a fresh cut, and bought myself a decent suit. Shen Yue and I went to pick out her wedding dress together. When she tried it on, she was absolutely glowing. I was standing outside the fitting room, watching her in the mirror, and for a moment, it all felt a little too good to be true. This girl, beautiful like an angel. She's really going to marry me. Everything went smoothly on our wedding day. Shen Yue's grandmother was doing much better now. She came to our wedding in a wheelchair. The old lady took my hand, she said in a faint voice. Thank you for taking care of our Yue. I was a little embarrassed. Actually, she's the one who's been taking care of me. As we exchanged rings, Shen Yue's hand was trembling. I held her hand and whispered something in her ear. Don't be nervous. It's just a formality. She let out a soft chuckle, and just like that, all the tension vanished. Mr. Yefan, do you, Yefan, take Shen Yue to be your wife? For richer or for poorer, do I protect her? I do. Miss Shen Yue, do you, Shen Yue, take Yifan to be your lawfully wedded husband? For richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, and to love him? Will you respect him? It's because she couldn't speak, but he gave a firm nod, and then started signing. The MC was a little taken aback, not knowing what to do. I smiled, and translate for him. He agreed. The audience erupted in thunderous applause, and when it came time for the kiss, she was a little shy. Her face turned as red as an apple. I gently pressed my lips to hers, a soft, tender kiss, as if I were afraid of hurting her. Then, I whispered in her ear, Mrs. Yeah, I'll be in your care from now on. She was laughing so hard in my arms, her shoulders were shaking. Our classmates all came over to toast and congratulate us. A former roommate I used to be close with said, You've changed, Fan. You used to have this look on your face, like you didn't care about anything. Now you look like a normal person. I glanced over at Shen Yue, who was talking with her grandmother, and smiled. Maybe it's because I have someone worth caring about now. After the wedding, we went back to our apartment upstairs. Everything was just as it always was. except now it was filled with the flowers and gifts from the wedding. Shen Yue took off her wedding dress and put on her usual home clothes. She was in the kitchen, making me a late-night snack. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching her busy figure bustling about, and in that moment, I felt a sudden sense of contentment. This is the life I've always wanted. Just the two of us, living a simple life together. He walked over, carrying a late-night snack. He saw I was lost in thought and waved his hand in front of my face. What are you thinking about? I was thinking of you. His face turned red again. She playfully swatted at me. Then, he wrote something down in his notebook. We got married. Do you regret it? I shook my head. No regrets. And you? No regrets either? It just feels a little surreal. It feels like a dream. I reached out and gently pinched her cheek. Does it hurt? He covered his face and shot me a glare. Then, she wrote in her notebook. This isn't a dream, and I love you. When Shen Yue wrote down those 3 words, her fingers trembled slightly. Under the dim, yellow light, her eyelashes were like butterfly wings, dampened by the rain. I stared at that line of text. It felt like my heart had been slammed hard by something. It wasn't the heart-pounding rush of a confession from the school's prettiest girl back in my youth, nor was it the vain satisfaction of splurging a fortune. Instead, it was a kind of fine, yet dull and heavy vine. A feeling of unprecedented security wrapped around me. I took the pen from his hand and closed the notebook. I put on a stern face, on purpose. Mrs. Ye, writing this at night. Are you trying to keep me up? She frantically shook her head and waved her hands. Her face turned beet red, gesturing clumsily with her hands. She really did know. At that moment, I let out a sigh. I reached out and pulled her into my arms, resting my chin on the soft crown of her head. The person in my arms grew still. Her breath was a soft whisper against my neck. In that moment, the Jiang family's wealth and status, it all just felt so meaningless. Forget Jiang Shui and Chu Chuchi. What I have now is worth more than the last 20+ years of my life, combined. But fate has a cruel way of tripping you up. Right when you think you've found happiness. Our married life was like bread, rising and expanding in a warm oven. Warm and fulfilling. We'd get up at 4 in the morning to knead the dough. The first batch of croissants is out of the oven, filling the entire room with its aroma. Shen Yue taught me how to decorate cakes. I'm all thumbs, but I always ended up making a complete mess with the cream. But he was never annoyed. He would hold my hand and guide me, correcting my movements little by little. In the afternoons, we don't get many customers. He would just take a nap with his head on the counter. Sunlight filters through the glass display window, casting dappled spots of light on her face. I'd often find myself lost, just watching her sleep. How could this girl be so pure, as if she had never been tainted by this filthy world? But the filth of this world always finds a way to splash back. One rainy night, the shop was about to close for the day. A few drunken men stumbled through the door. The one leading them was a local gangster from the area. They call him Brother Chiang. He'd been here before, trying to collect protection money, so I chased them out with a broom. He reeked of alcohol. He kicked over the potted plant by the door, in a belligerent tone. Hey, meat girl, get out here. Shen Yue was checking the accounts. The voice made her jump. She instinctively looked at me. I pushed him behind me, grabbing a rolling pin and looking for trouble. Zhang Ge grinned, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. Look at young master Yeah. Really thinks he's hot stuff now. So, I hear you married a mute, bro. Here to get a drink at the wedding feast. The thugs behind him burst into raucous laughter. Their eyes were glued to Shen Yue. Disgusting. I tightened my grip on the rolling pin. My knuckles turned white. Protecting her pretty well, huh? As he spoke, he took a step closer. His boozy breath hit me in the face. You got a death wish or something? Don't you want this shop anymore? Suddenly, Shen Yue popped out from behind me. In her hand, she held a box of freshly baked cookies. She forced a smile, gesturing towards them. It was her way of offering them a treat. At that moment, this fool always thinks kindness can hua jie malice. Chiang knocked the paper box right out of his hand. Who eats this crap? Cookies shattered all over the floor. He reached out to grab Shen Yue's wrist. I completely lost it. I just swung the rolling pin right at him. In the chaos, I don't know how many punches and kicks I took. All I remember is shielding Shen Yue, holding her tight in the corner of the counter. The sound of a flute drifted from a distance, growing closer. The thugs scattered in an instant. Shen Yue's trembling hand reached out to touch the blood on the corner of my mouth. Tears were streaming down her face, but not a single sound came out. I wiped my face and forced a smile. Hey, what are you crying for? Your man isn't dead yet. But she only cried harder. She just curled up in my arms, like a frightened little animal. That night, he held onto my arm and slept through the whole night. The slightest movement would startle him awake. Seeing the dark circles under his eyes, a violent, lingering fear churned inside me. What if I hadn't been there to protect it today? The next day, I bought a solid steel rod from a flea market. I kept it under the counter. Shen Yue saw it and shook her head at me, hard. I tapped on the steel rod. It's best not to use it for self-defense against him. He lowered his eyes and wrote in the notebook, I'm afraid you'll get hurt. Then I'm even more afraid of you getting hurt. I ruffled her hair. Shen Yue, you're all I have now. He looked up at me. His eyes were glistening with tears. And finally, gave a slight nod. But it wasn't long before, and just like that, Jiang Li reappeared, back to haunt them again. This time, he didn't come into the shop. Instead, he pulled up in a flashy red sports car and parked it right by the curb. His sunglasses hid half his face. He crooked his finger at me. I'm throwing white flour. Couldn't be bothered with him. So I just got out of the car, leaning against the car door with with a smirk. Does your wife know how you really helped Chu Chuyu? Her tone was Jiaoxin. It slipped. A sack of flour thudded heavily onto the ground, sending a white cloud of dust into the air. Hearing the noise, Shen Yue rushed out of the shop. Looking at us in confusion, Jiang Li took off her sunglasses. Her gaze swept over Shen Yue with undisguised pity. How pathetic. To be stuck with a loser like you who can't even afford a decent wedding. I clenched my fists. My veins were pulsing. Here's a reward for you. Shut up. What's wrong? Scared? You weren't like this back then. When the school beauty was begging you. Weren't you just loving that thrill of doling out charity? Why are you suddenly playing the devoted lover now? Shen Yue couldn't understand what Jiang Li was saying, but he could feel the tension in the air. She gently tugged at the corner of my shirt. Her eyes were filled with worry. I took a deep breath, suppressing my rage. I turned and gestured to Shen Yue. It's okay. You go on inside. Shen Yue hesitated, not moving. But then, Jiang Li suddenly played a recording from her phone. It was the sound of Chu Chuchi's voice, tearful and choked. From that day in the grove, I'm willing to give you my heart. I'll give you everything I have, but only if you can promise me one thing. I'm no philanthropist. Shen Yue's face went pale in an instant. He looked at me, and then at Jiang Li. Her lips trembled with emotion, but no sound would come out. Satisfied, Jiang Li put away her phone. Little sister, you really think he's some kind of good guy? He only helped Chu Chuchi to get a kick out of watching her suffer. That's a lie. And helping you? That was probably just a whim. I completely lost it. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone. Jiang Li screamed and ducked into the car and locked the doors. The sports car sped away. Only Shen Yue and I were left, standing there amidst the swirling dust. His head was bowed. Her shoulders were trembling slightly. I wanted to touch him, but he took a subconscious step back. That single step back felt like a knife to my heart. After closing up for the night, the attic felt oppressive. And there you are again, making the bed with your back to me. But you wouldn't look at me. I turned him by the shoulder, forcing him to face me. You believe him? Shen Yue bit her lip. Tears welled up in her eyes, writing in a notebook. Is what he's saying true? Yes and no. I wiped my face. I told her how I turned down Chu Chuchi back then, and told her the whole story of how we made that deal. From start to finish. Shen Yue, I admit, I'm not exactly a good person, but with you, I never meant it to be charity. He was silent for a long time, so long that I thought he would never speak to me again. Finally, he raised his hand and slowly began to sign. I'm scared. Scared of what? I'm afraid that one day you'll find me boring, and you won't want me anymore. His fingers trembled. I have nothing. Only you. My heart clenched and pulled her into a tight embrace. I was the fool. Only you. That night, we fell asleep in each other's arms, like two wounded animals, licking each other's wounds. But Jiang Li's words were like a thorn, piercing deep into Shen Yue's heart. It became a sore spot. If I'm just 10 minutes late coming home, he would get all antsy. If a female customer chats with me for a bit too long, she would just quietly walk away. I noticed, but I didn't know how to make it right. Until one night, I woke up in the dead of night and found the space beside me empty. Shen Yue was curled up in a corner of the balcony, shedding silent tears in the moonlight. I walked over to her and hugged her from behind. Her body stiffened. Then she relaxed in my arms and buried her face in my chest. Shen Yue, let me tell you a story. I told you about my dad and my mom, my brother and Jiang Xue. They saw the rot beneath the glamorous facade of our family. I never used to believe in love. I thought it was all just an exchange of interests. But you're different. You're the reason I feel like there's still some humanity left in this world. Under the moonlight, her eyes were like black glass, submerged in water. She reached out, tracing the line of my eyebrows with her fingertips. My eyes, the bridge of my nose, and finally, her fingers stopped on my lips. Then, she leaned in and gave me a feather-light kiss. It was a kiss so pure, untouched by any desire. Like the first snowflake landing in your palm. I froze, and I kissed him back. Something deep within that pattern quietly melted away. The thorn that Jiang Li had planted was finally and silently pulled out. The sacred fire was finally at peace. But danger always lurks in the shadows. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor walked into the shop. 5 years have passed. He looked even more bloated. His tailored suit looked completely out of place in a simple bakery. He was alone, without his bodyguard, all by himself, when his gaze fell upon Shen Yue with a cold, scrutinizing gaze. So, this is the life you've chosen, hiding away in a place like this, playing house with a mute. I shielded Shen Yue behind me. What do you want? And with that, she just went ahead and pulled up a chair to sit down. Yeah, fun. You're still so childish. Shen Yue suddenly grabbed my arm tightly. Jiang Xue leisurely opened her handbag. She then took out a yellowed photograph and slid it across the table. In the photo was a young couple. The man's features bore a striking resemblance to Shen Yue's. The woman was holding a baby in her arms. Your grandmother never told you, did she? Your parents didn't die from an illness. It was a car accident. accident. The man who killed them was named Ye Tao, and Ye Fan, he was the one driving drunk. The air instantly froze. My mind went blank. I could barely stay on my feet. Shen Yuwei's eyes were locked on the photo. Her face was ashen. Surprised? Jiang Shui stood up, looking down on us from above. Ye Fan, your father killed her parents, and now you're pretending to be some devoted lover marrying her. How ironic. Just shut up. I roared, but my voice trembled violently. Jiang Shui leaned in, bending close to Shen Yuwei's ear, whispering, "Little sister, and you think she's being nice to you out of the goodness of her heart?" With that, he turned and left, as if he had never been there at all, leaving behind only a hellish dead silence. Shen Yuwei stood frozen, completely still, as if her soul had been ripped out. I reached out to touch her, but she recoiled as if struck by lightning. Her eyes were empty and unfamiliar. "Shen Yuwei, let me explain. I don't know." Shen Yuwei shoved him away violently. I rushed upstairs and slammed the attic door shut, locking it behind her. I ran after her and started pounding on the door, but there was no answer from inside. After a long moment, a piece of paper was slipped out from under the door. On it were just a few trembling words. "Just let me be." That night, I sat outside her door until dawn. There was no sound from inside the room the entire time, but I knew she hadn't slept either. The next day, Shen Yuwei didn't come downstairs to open the shop. I made some congee and brought it up to her. I found the door was still locked. The third day, the fourth day, it was the same story. He locked himself in his room. He wouldn't eat or drink. The bombshell Jiang Shui had dropped threatened to completely shatter the tiny world we had just built. For the next few days, Shen Yuwei locked herself in the attic, like a wild animal trapped in a cage, pacing back and forth in the cramped little shop. Bags of flour were scattered all over the floor. On the baking tray, burnt cookies from days ago were still left behind. The air was thick with the sour, fermenting stench of despair. Countless times, I wanted to rush forward and smash through that flimsy door, but every time I saw what was slipped under the door, the handwriting he slipped through the crack, the notes grew more and more illegible, and the hand I reached out would just fall back, powerless. I was afraid that getting close to him would be the final straw that breaks him. This feeling of helplessness is even more crushing than when my family's empire collapsed. Back then, at least I could be angry. I could curse. I could just grab my bags and walk away. But now, I don't even have the right to be angry. The blood of the man who killed them runs through my veins. Jiang Shui had found my most vulnerable spot with pinpoint accuracy. It was a fatal blow. Late at night on the fifth day, from the attic came a muffled whimper, like the plaintive cry of a small animal. Then came the dull thud of something heavy hitting the floor. My heart stopped. I couldn't care about anything else. I used the spare key and forced the door open. Shen Yuwei collapsed by the bedside. His face was ashen. His lips were parched and cracked. An overturned cup lay beside her hand. It seems he wants to drink some water, but she didn't even have the strength for that. He hadn't eaten or drunk anything for days. Her body had reached its breaking point. I rushed over and picked her up. She was as light as a feather, as if she might vanish at any moment. I patted his face. It was Lu Wei. His voice was trembling uncontrollably. His eyelids trembled. He slowly cracked his eyes open. His gaze landed on my face, but his eyes were empty, unfocused. For a moment, I was truly afraid he was just going to die right then and there. Afraid I wouldn't even get the chance to atone for my sins. I frantically rushed downstairs and heated up some porridge and mixed in some warm water. I gently pried his lips apart. I carefully spoon-fed him, taking great care. He swallowed mechanically. His gaze remained unfocused. After feeding him half a bowl of porridge, I brought over some warm water. I gently wiped her haggard face and her cold hands and feet with a towel. The entire time he was like a doll, completely at my mercy. The only sign of life was the occasional tear that rolled down his cheek, proof that he was still alive. I tucked it back under the covers and lay down beside him. I held her tight, even through the quilt. I was afraid to sleep, afraid that if I closed my eyes, he would disappear. Shen Yuwei, I whispered in her ear. My voice was terribly hoarse. I know you can hear me. You can hate me. You can blame me. I don't care what you do, but you can't die. If you die, what am I supposed to do? In my 20+ years of life, I've done my share of messed up things, but I never meant to hurt anyone. It was my father's sin. I accept that. If hating me makes you feel better, then go ahead. Then hate me. As I said this, I grabbed her hand and pressed it against my heart. But you can't punish me like this, by punishing yourself. Your grandmother worked herself to the bone to raise you. This isn't how you were meant to end up. Remember that croissant you gave me? It was the most bitter and the sweetest thing I've ever tasted. Bitter because of my downfall, and sweet because your shop is called Faint Light, and you're the one who lit it. If you were gone, this light would go out, and my world would truly go completely dark. I don't know how long I kept talking, until my throat was dry and sore. The body in my arms was still cold. The next morning, at dawn, I was about to get up and make him something to eat when my sleeve, but a cold hand gently caught my sleeve. I whipped my head around, and our eyes met. Although his eyes were still red and swollen, but there was a faint glimmer of light in those eyes. He looked at me, his lips moving slightly, but no sound came out. But her lips were faintly forming the word water. I practically stumbled and scrambled to get her some water. My hands were shaking so much I spilled half of it. After I helped her drink a few sips, she leaned into my arms and closed her eyes. Another tear rolled down the corner of her eye, but this time, It wasn't the dead silence of despair, but a fragile vulnerability tinged with weariness. The realization that he was letting me get close. It was a realization that brought me to the verge of tears of joy. The days that followed were a slow and difficult process of healing. Shen Yuwei's body gradually recovered, but the wounds in his heart were far from healed. He became unusually quiet, even more so than before. He still helps me run the shop, but his movements were sluggish. He would often just stare blankly at the plates by the river. At night, she would still wake up with a start, breaking out in a cold sweat. I held her in my arms. I could feel her heart pounding like crazy. He stopped using the notebook to talk to me, but when he didn't need to express himself, or just simple gestures, I knew that Thorn was still buried deep in his heart. Jiang Shue's portrait. The venom was eating away at her. All the trust in our relationship. She started to instinctively pull away whenever I touched her. I'd serve her food. She would freeze for a second before taking it. At night, I want to hold her as we sleep. She would stiffly turn away from me. This deliberate distance is more suffocating than any argument. I know she's struggling, and re-examine everything about us. My help, my proposal, and all my love for her. Was it just born from a belated sense of guilt? From paying a father's debt? Then, one afternoon, things took a turn. There was this old lady, a regular, who always came in for the whole wheat bread. With a trembling hand, she handed us a thick envelope. She said they were specialty cookies her son had sent from abroad. She insisted on thanking us for always looking after her. Shen Yuwei tried to refuse, but she accepted them for her daughter. You and your husband, you're both good people. You don't see honest business like this anymore these days. You two take good care of each other, all right? The old lady held Shen Yuwei's hand, chattering on. After the old lady left, Shen Yuwei stood behind the counter for a long time, holding that box of cookies. Sunlight filtered through the display window, casting a glow on her lowered lashes. I watched from a distance. I didn't dare to interrupt. Suddenly, she turned and walked up to me. He handed me something dry and cracked. Then, he pointed to the box of old things in the corner. Inside were a few photos from our wedding, and the things he treasured. That tattered notebook I used to write down the insurance terms for him back then. I was taken aback for a moment, and then I understood what he meant. I walked over and dug the notebook out from the bottom of the box. I dusted it off and handed it to him. He took the notebook. He flipped to the last blank page. He picked up the pen and began to write. His hand was still trembling slightly, but his handwriting was slow and heavy. I dreamed of my parents. They were in this really bright place, smiling at me. It seems they don't blame you. Having written this, he paused for a long time. A small dot of ink smudged on the paper. Then, he continued to write. I was wondering, if you're only being nice to me out of guilt, then why? When I was stealing that bread, all I saw in your eyes was impatience. No pity. All you did was make a phone call. I wanted to get rid of a problem. Why, just when I agreed to marry you, you were stunned for a long time. And then, his ears turned red. He looked up, gazing at me with tear-filled eyes. His eyes were filled with immense confusion and a glimmer of hope. He wasn't questioning me, but was asking me for an answer that could finally free him from this nightmare. I looked at him. It felt like my heart was being gently squeezed by a soft hand. I took the pen and carefully wrote beneath his words, stroke by stroke. Shen Yuwei, I'm not a good person. When I helped you, I wasn't really thinking about it. Maybe I was just in a good mood that day, or maybe I just didn't want the trouble. When I married you, I wasn't sure if it was love back then either. I just felt at ease whenever I was with you. But now, I know for sure. I can't stand to see you cry. I can't stand to see anyone bully you. When you're hurting, I wish I could take the pain for you. This has nothing to do with who my father is. It only has to do with the fact that you are Shen Yuwei. If I have to talk about guilt, the only thing I feel guilty about is not meeting you sooner, for making you suffer so much, and for not being able to protect you, and for you to suffer again, all because of me. I handed the pen back to him. He looked at my drawing. The tears started to fall even harder. He picked up the pen and forcefully added 3 words after what I had written. Then, he put the pen down. He reached out his hand and gently took my fingers in his. His fingers were still cold, but the firmness of his grip, and in that instant, it chased away all the darkness in my heart. That night, he finally stopped sleeping with his back to me. He curled up in my arms, like a fledgling bird that has finally found its nest. His breathing was steady and deep. I listened to the sound of his breathing, and I thought, this must be the most beautiful sound in the world. We know the scars are still there, and perhaps they always will be, but at least I was carrying a heavy weight. But the bond between us, in a way, grew even stronger. The decision to leave the city was made a few days later. It wasn't entirely because of the threat Jiang Shui posed. More than anything, we just wanted a change of scenery. A place where the shadows of the past don't exist. A true fresh start. Shen Yuwei didn't hesitate for a second. But for him, wherever I am, that's home. We sold the Twilight Bakery and packed our bags, ready to start a new life in the South. When our neighbors found out we were leaving, they all came to see us off. They came with all sorts of local specialties, filling our hands with bags large and small. If you're ever mistreated out there, you just come back home, you hear? Your mother-in-law will set things right for you. She held Shen Yuwei's hand, wiping away her tears. With teary eyes, Shen Yuwei nodded. She then placed a bag of freshly baked cookies into her mother-in-law's hand. The night before we left, we were in the attic, packing up the last of our things. Shen Yuwei pulled a tin box from the bottom of the wardrobe. Inside were her grandmother's keepsakes, a few old photographs, and the insurance policy I wrote for him all those years ago, and the paper had yellowed with age, but they're still clear. Just in case I ever fall on hard times while begging on the streets, just remember to give me a bowl. That's all I ask. She looked at the piece of paper. Then, she suddenly smiled, but as she laughed, the tears began to fall again. She picked up a pen and solemnly wrote a few words on the back and handed it to me. For the rest of my life, you'll always have half of what I have. My eyes welled up with tears and pulled her into my arms. All right, it's a promise. As the train started to move, this city, a place that holds so much of our pain and so much of our warmth, fading into the distance outside the window. Shen Yuwei had fallen asleep on my shoulder. Her hand was still clutching the corner of my shirt. The sunlight filtered through the car window, casting a warm glow on her face, so peaceful and serene. I lowered my head and kissed the top of her head. I closed my eyes. What does the future hold? I don't know. But as long as he's with me, anywhere can be home. In the end, we settled down in a small coastal town. With the money from selling the shop, we opened a smaller dessert place. We named it Evening Time. Shen Yuwei was in charge of the baking, and I greeted the customers. Our days were simple, but peaceful. Little by little, she started to come out of the shadows. A smile even started to appear on her face. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she would still jolt awake from nightmares, but I would always be the first to hold her and gently pat her back until she fell back asleep. One evening, a year later, we were taking a walk along the beach, hand in hand. The setting sun melted into gold. The tide lapped gently at the shore. Shen Yuwei suddenly stopped in her tracks, pointing at something glinting on the sand. I picked it up. It was a piece of glass, smoothed and rounded by the waves. It refracted a warm halo of light in the sunset. She took the piece of glass from me. She held it up to the sunlight, gazing at it for a long time. Then, she placed it in the palm of my hand and cupped her hands around mine. He gestured for me to keep it safe. I teased him, calling it a token of our love. He nodded vigorously. His eyes were sparkling. One afternoon, the air was heavy with heat. There weren't many customers in the shop. Shen Yuwei was at the counter, preparing the cake bases for the next day. I was sitting behind the counter, checking the accounts. I heard a very faint sob. I looked up. I saw that Shen Yuwei's hand, the one holding the egg beater, had frozen in place. She was staring blankly out the window. Outside the window, a young father was walking by, his daughter on his back. The little girl's tinkling laughter drifted in through the glass. I put down the ledger. I walked over to him. He didn't look at me, his eyes still following the figures of the father and daughter, until they disappeared at the end of the alley. Her profile looked a little pale in the afternoon light. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite describe, a complex mix of longing and sorrow. I gently touched his arm. He snapped out of it. He forced a smile at me. He shook his head, as if to say he was fine. Then, he lowered his head and started stirring the batter in the bowl with more force, as if trying to drive something away. I knew he was thinking of his own parents. That childhood, which should have been filled with his parents' presence. A childhood filled with laughter and joy. A void that he could never fill. Jiang Shue's words were like a poisoned thorn. Even on the sunniest of days could still sting her when she least expected it. That night, after we closed up shop, we sat on the small steps by the back door, letting the sea breeze wash over us. The waves lapped gently against the shore. In the distance, the lights of fishing boats twinkled. Shen Yuwei leans on my shoulder. It was so quiet. I held her hand. Her palm was a little cold. I broke the silence. Should we go see them? His body stiffened slightly. He looked up at me, puzzled. I was carefully choosing my words. I'm going to see your parents. I know where the cemetery is. It was in the information Jiang Shue left behind. Let's go talk to them. To tell them, you're doing well now. And please say I'm sorry for my dad too. The last few words were incredibly hard to get out, but I felt I had to say it. Shen Yuwei froze for a long moment. Tears quickly welled up in her eyes, but she fought back the tears, refusing to let them fall. He looked at me. There was a struggle in his eyes, and fear. But in the end, it all settled into a decision. He gave a heavy nod. We chose a bright, sunny morning. We closed up the shop, carrying a bouquet that Shen Yuwei had made. A bouquet she had arranged herself with white daisies and green lisianthus. We went to a cemetery in the Jiaowai. The cemetery was quiet. It was nestled against the mountains and faced the sea, a peaceful place for eternal rest. According to the records, we found the joint tombstone. The tombstone was simple. Engraved on it was a photo of Shen Yuwei's parents. The details had faded with time. Shen Yuwei walked up to the tombstone. He crouched down. She gently laid the bouquet of flowers down. He reached out his hand. With his fingertips, he gently wiped away the dust and fallen leaves from the tombstone. His touch was as gentle as if he were handling a fragile dream. She didn't cry, just silently wiping away the sunlight, illuminating her focused profile. There was a serenity that was almost divine. I stood behind him, lost in the moments with my parents. After a long while, he stood up and turned around and beckoned for me to come over. I walked over and stood beside him. Standing before the tombstone, the sea breeze played with our hair and the hems of our clothes. Shen Yue glanced at the tombstone and then looked at me. Then he raised his hand. She began to sign. Her movements were slow. It was as if every single gesture poured out her entire heart. Mom, Dad, this is Ye Fan, my husband. She pauses for a moment. She takes a deep breath and continued to sign. He was so good to me. We opened our own little shop. We call it Evening Time. Life was peaceful. I've made my peace with the past. It was a terrible accident. I know it wasn't Ye Fan's fault. He's not like his father. His gestures became heavy, but his resolve remained firm. He turned his head to look at me. Tears finally began to stream down silently, but the corners of his mouth were turned up in a smile. He continued, speaking to the tombstone. So please don't blame him, and don't you worry about me either. I'm very happy now. I watched as she introduced him to her parents in sign language. I wanted to defend myself, telling them about her happiness. A lump formed in my throat, choking me. My eyes burned with unshed tears. I reached out and took her other hand in mine, holding it tightly. I turned to the tombstone and bowed deeply. As I straightened up, I looked at the faded photo on the tombstone. I said solemnly, Uncle, Auntie, I'm Ye Fan. I'm sorry, and thank you for bringing Shen Yue into this world. Please, rest assured, as long as I'm alive, I will never let her suffer again. I will protect her with everything I have. I'm speaking slowly. Every word comes from the bottom of my heart. I know that words are just words, and they're easy to break, but it's the only thing I can do. With our tribute paid, hand in hand, we walked up the hill towards the cemetery. On the way back, we were lost in our own thoughts, yet felt an unusual sense of lightness. It was like a heavy burden, one I'd carried for years, had finally been lifted. He even took the initiative to point at the wildflowers by the roadside, and excitedly gestured to me. We could try using the leaves and stems of that flower to make a natural food coloring. From then on, I noticed a subtle change in Shen Yue. That faint trace of gloom in her eyes seemed to have faded a lot. Her smile became brighter and more at ease. She started to be more proactive in planning our future together. Like what kind of flowers we should plant in front of the shop. Like once we've saved up enough money, maybe we should rent out the space next door too. And expand the shop. She even gestured as she spoke. I knew that trip to the cemetery wasn't just about finding closure for his parents, but also our official farewell to the past. We can't change the tragedy that has already happened, but we can choose how we face the future. We took that evening, a vessel filled with bitter memories, and carefully poured it away, and into the half-empty bowl that remained, we poured in understanding and forgiveness, and the sweetness, brewed by Shen Yue's own hands, savoring the flavor of the rest of our lives, slowly and deliberately. One day, after we closed up shop, we sat by the sea watching the sunset. The setting sun painted the sea with a magnificent, fleeting splendor. Shen Yue rested her head on my shoulder. Then, she suddenly traced a few words gently in my palm. It wasn't sign language. Instead, she was writing with her finger. I tried to make out what she was writing. Evening time. My heart was filled with joy. I lowered my head and kissed her hair.